The Planning Commission meeting for the City of Wilmington for Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024 is called to order. Would you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Commissioner Kofer has an excused absence. Will you put that in the minutes, please? Mr. Attorney, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All matters requiring commission action shall be presented to the Planning Commission by the planning staff and the applicant. In situations where planning staff is the applicant, there will be only one presentation. City staff will make the first presentation. The applicant will make the second presentation. Both presentations are limited to 5 minutes each. To maintain an orderly meeting, all presentations shall proceed without interruption unless the commission desires to intervene with questions or comments. The chair will open the public hearing for those physically present wishing to speak about an item. Those in favor of an item shall be heard first, followed by those opposed to an item. A 10-minute time will be allowed for public comment in favor of an item. A 10-minute time will be allowed for public comment in opposition to an item. A staff member will track the 10-minute time periods, and is that Ms. Painter tonight? Thank you. And will notify the speaker at the 5-minute mark, the 1-minute mark, and verbally call time when it expires. The chair, in their discretion, may extend these time periods. All groups, organizations, neighborhoods, or similar associations desiring to comment are asked to appoint one spokesperson to present their concerns or point of view to the commission on each agenda item. The public has been encouraged to submit their comments in writing via a web-based form located on the City of Wilmington's website. All comments received prior to 3 p.m. today were forwarded unedited to the Planning Commission. All comments received will be delivered to City Council when the item advances. All comments received will be made available to the public if requested. All votes will be voice votes after proper motions are made and consistency statements are read into the record. The chair will state the outcome of the vote and the action. Rezoning requests that receive an unfavorable recommendation from the Planning Commission may be appealed by the applicant to the Wilmington City Council. Appeals should be in the form of a letter submitted to the city clerk within 10 days of this hearing. Any items being appealed will tentatively be heard by City Council on May 21st. Commissioners, you had the minutes in your packet. Is there any revisions to the minutes?
I'll make a motion we adopt the minutes from the March meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Pollack has moved to approve the minutes from the March 6th meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. The motion passes 6-0. Our first item is a general rezoning of property containing .339 of an acre located at 203 52nd Street from R10, moderate density single dwelling district, to R5, medium density mixed residential district. Ms. France is here to deliver our staff report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. The site is located southeast of the intersection of 52nd Street and Mulberry Avenue and contains approximately .339 acres and is currently occupied by a detached single dwelling unit. This map shows the general vicinity surrounding the request, as well as photos of the subject property. And these are photos of the existing conditions surrounding the subject property. These are photos of the adjacent properties and land uses. Residential uses are located in all directions, with commercial and civic institutional uses to the south. The site is currently zoned R10, medium density single dwelling district, and is bordered by R10 to the east and west, R5 and R5CD to the north, and CB community business to the south. Subject property is identified as Live Work Innovation Zone Area of Opportunity on the Comprehensive Plan's Growth Strategies map, and the plan supports increased densities with infill development near major commercial services. Low to medium density residential areas and/or low-intensity mixed-use developments should serve as transitions between lower density neighborhoods and more intensive commercial, residential, and mixed-use areas. Staff believes the proposed zoning amendment is consistent with the recommendations of the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan and that the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Staff recommends approval. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Thank you, Ms. France.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for the staff at this time? Commissioner Pollock?
Miranda, quick question on where you guys, in the packet where you do the, the evaluation with the arrows and whatever, and 1.7.3, it says the need to protect the desired neighborhood character. What do we define as the character of that neighborhood? And I asked the question from the standpoint, when I drove up there, I see a couple single-family homes. I see, looks like I got a business on the right side, then cat corner, I've got some duplexes going up here. So what is it? Do we consider it a family area? Do we consider it a mixed use? I mean, what's your thought, please?
I would think that it's more of a mixed-use area due to the commercial fronting Oleander and then the single-family and duplex residential to the north.
So would we call this a transitional area?
I would, yes, the property in question would be a good transition from commercial to single-family residential from the lot size that the applicant is proposing. It could allow for more density that way from commercial to single-family.
Okay.
There's a mix of density in between.
And I would pose the same question to the applicant when she
Of
comes up.
course.
Thank you, Miranda.
Anyone else? Commissioner Lennon?
We both looked at the same graph. Just like put me inside the mindset when the conversation goes on, because what jumped out at me was the circle that's up now on the screen with the split. And so to Commissioner Pollock's point, I mean, some of these things seem right in line with the things that we're, as a city, trying to accomplish. And I'm just curious how the conversations go where you end up with a split recommendation.
The split is more of the unknown with the general rezoning. However, due to the lot size, as I had mentioned, there's only a certain amount of density that you can get on that lot. So looking at the zoning itself, the conditions surrounding that lot, and then what's already there, it seems more in tune with the general area.
So you kind of touched on one that we talked about in the workshop that we did a couple weeks ago. So how much of it is related to the general fear of, or the fear of a general rezoning?
How much of what, I
The
guess?
split decision.
Well, the split decision, I guess there is a little bit of apprehensiveness due to the fact that we can't condition anything here with you today, whether that be driveway location, height of the structure. It's just whatever they propose is what is going to happen.
But if I remember, I think maybe it's either in the applicant's presentation or I think actually there's a slide that Mr. Chambers put up during that discussion that, I mean, originally these were teeny little lots. I don't know, it's just an observation. I think if we're nervous because we can't put any conditions on it, I think that may be something we want to think about. That was it.
I have a follow-up to that. Are there any uses allowed in R5 that you would be concerned about in this property that could be done on this particular size site?
I would say no, due to the size being less than 15,000 square feet, a little over 10,000, which is the R10 that it's zoned now. The most that you can get on that lot is 4 units.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams?
Miranda, off the top of your head, do you know the differences in allowable lot coverage or allowable height between R10 and R5?
They're both the same. It's 50% lot cover or building coverage on the lot, and then 35 feet in height.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have Exhausted our questions for now. Thank you, Ms. France, and the applicant is welcome to come up.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name's Cindy Wolf, and I'm glad I did put a couple slides together based upon your questions. One of the things that I think is important just to go into the record and to understand is I've been working with Mickey Falk since back in 2001. He developed the combination of quadruplexes, duplexes, what is known as Louisa Lane. It is a very stable rental community. He's had it forever. But he now owns all of the properties that are in red, with the red dots on them. And of course, 203 is the one with the black border around it. The other properties bordering him are Joe Priest. And Joe Priest is historically a residential rental developer here in town. And both of them have been very stable entities in our community. What Mickey has done along 52nd Street since then is move a house from over in College Acres. In fact, I think the two bottom ones were both actually moved from College Acres. He has recently built 3 duplexes on the left side of 52nd Street, and that's in the top picture. They're brand new. They did go through the conditional district, and I guess to point, he probably would not have necessarily addressed them to the street if he hadn't had to because of the conditional district. Because Louisa Lane was sort of an interior, internal type of development, and he really wanted those houses to become that. So I can see certain issues that are definitely an advantage in the conditional. This particular lot has this brick house on it. It works well. It is just the single family. But what we looked at initially, it makes sense to keep the house. This lot could be turned into the 2 lots. The bottom lot could be a duplex. So this is not a conditional, it's a straight rezoning. This isn't, but I think it is still sort of germane to the conversation, is that sometimes it just goes through so much process to be conditional when other properties in here are all this R5 or CB to the other side of it. Even the one next to him is a substandard non-conforming lot, but it's single family. So that being said, basically, as Miranda pointed out, this could be a quadruplex, and a quadruplex probably wouldn't fit as well aesthetically into the neighborhood, but I think that his track record, and again, you can't trust somebody if it's not a conditional, but I think it's just it was worth bringing up. So that being said, I think that this property is certainly consistent, reasonable, and in the public interest based upon the comprehensive plan, because this type of infill for location efficiency is just the right thing to do. And I'd be happy to answer your questions if I haven't.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Pollack?
I always hate being the first, but what the heck. Go back to your picture that has the red dots, identify the Falk, yeah, right there. So the property exactly, to the right is currently an R10 as well.
That's right. It is single family. It's a
Right.
non-conforming size, but it is also his property.
Yeah. Is there a house on that today?
Yes.
Okay, so my question would be is, are we going to be having this discussion on that piece of property?
No,
well,
because-
hang on, let me finish. Or the desire to combine the two at some point for some type of a development, or this is going to stay single, 203 is by itself, 6 is by itself? I mean, we're never going to bring those together?
There's no reason to. I mean, the
Okay.
reason this one made sense is because it is in fact a 10,000 square foot lot.
Right.
So it had the ability to be turned into 2 R5, whether they be single family or duplex lots.
And the other question I have is, I just want to make sure I understood. You said the house that's on 203 today, is that house going to stay there?
That's his intention.
Okay.
Now, obviously, there's no promise in that, but you can see, I mean, it's brick, it's a solid
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
it's got good
Yeah.
aesthetics to it.
That was my thought when I was out
And
there.
that's why I went through this exercise before we came forward with the rezoning, to see if it could work, it could still have a duplex for his benefit on the southern lot, and maintain the existing home.
That's all I have right now.
All right.
Thank you
Ms.
very much.
Wolf. Okay, we will open the public hearing, and we'll start with those in favor of agenda item number 1, and there's 10 minutes allotted for anyone who's here to speak on agenda item 1 in favor. Okay, is there anyone here who is here to speak in opposition to item number 1? Anyone here to speak at all on agenda item number 1? Okay, the public hearing is closed. Do we have discussion on this piece? This item? Any other questions, comments?
I'll just say that the main reason I asked the question about bulk and scale, a lot of times we only talk about density as a consideration, but given the fact that both of these are, essentially equitable height and lot coverage, there's the worries about incompatible scale go away in my mind. So, I would be prepared to make a motion if there's no other thoughts from the commission.
Any other comments? What's the will of the commission?
I'd like to make a motion to approve agenda item number 1, a request to rezone 203 52nd Street from R10 to R5. This request is consistent with the objectives and policies of the following plans adopted by the City of Wilmington: the Create Wilmington Comprehensive Plan. The Planning Commission considers its approval to be reasonable and in the public interest because the proposal would allow for additional residential density near commercial services and is compatible with the surrounding zoning. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends approval of this request.
Thank you. Commissioner Adams has moved to approve agenda item number 1. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded by Commissioner Collier. Is there further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries 6-0. Item number 2 is a street closure, which I believe is going to be continued. Do we have Mr. Mahoney here to make that request?
Good evening, Madam Chair. Yes, the applicant reached out earlier this week. They're unable to make the meeting tonight, so we are requesting a continuance on their behalf. They've requested a continuance to the June 5th Planning Commission meeting. Just wanted to pass that information along.
Thank you. Can we get a motion to continue on agenda item number 2 to a date certain of June 5th?
So move.
Commissioner Woodruff has moved to continue agenda item number 2. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion carries 6-0. All right, agenda item number 3 is some LDC maintenance to amend the Land Development Code for various amendments and clean up items related to R3, residential purpose statement, mixed-use MX density standards, accessory dwelling units, industrial corridors, and parking. And Ms. Thurston is here to present our staff report.
I will begin by saying that the industrial corridors portion of the proposed amendments is not moving forward at this time. But thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Whenever the new Land Development Code went into effect, December 1st, 2021, city staff committed to regular maintenance of the new code to correct errors or elements that do not work in implementation. And the amendments before you this evening are part of that ongoing process. They'll include changes to the universal use table, the R3 purpose statement, accessory buildings and accessory dwellings, legacy districts, and electric vehicle parking. The first of those items is to the universal use table, and that's just to reflect that offices are not a permitted use in the residential historic district. The code in effect in 2021 only allowed such uses when occupied by a nonprofit historic organization, which is very specific. The new code doesn't differentiate between types of professional office uses, and the intent was to delete this as an allowable use in the HDR, which is reflected in the district-specific standards. The second amendment will change the purpose statement of the R3 district. Currently, the R3 zoning district only exists within the 1945 corporate limits. However, the same type of historic development pattern exists beyond that strict border. The proposed amendment would delete reference to the 1945 corporate limits in the R3 purpose statement and facilitate potential rezoning to R3 outside that area. And you can see the map to the right that shows the 1945 corporate limits. The third amendment will just correct a reference to a table in the Central Business District standards. Amendment 4 will remove density limits for watershed resource protection areas and conservation areas within the legacy districts. Legacy districts include the MX, the UMX outside of the 1945 corporate limits, some multifamily districts, and the R20 district. When rewriting the LDC, staff recognized the impervious surface impacted water quality in our tidal creeks and waterways much more directly than density, and decided to base exceptional design allowances on that metric alone. However, those provisions did not automatically carry over to the legacy districts, even though staff continues to believe that this is a best management practice in these sensitive areas. Amendments 5 and 6 are related to accessory buildings and structures, including accessory dwelling units. The LDC currently allows up to 2 accessory buildings per parcel and limits the total combined area of those buildings to no more than 100% of the square footage of the primary structure. Accessory dwelling units are allowed up to 1,200 square feet. The table in the code inadvertently also restricts the square footage of any accessory building to 1,200 square feet, whether it's used as a dwelling or not. This amendment would correct that discrepancy and allow all of the total square footage allowed for accessory buildings to be in one building if desired. The illustration on the top shows what is currently allowed by city code, and the lower right-hand corner is what the new code would allow. ADUs will still be limited to 50% of the square footage of the principal structure. However, accessory buildings in general will not be. Current code allows accessory dwelling units in every residential zoning district, whether the lots are conforming to the area requirements of the district or not. Lots that are non-conforming, though, are only allowed to have attached accessory dwelling units, which can result in arbitrary connections, as the one shown on the lower right-hand corner, or in the lower right-hand corner. So the proposed amendment would also delete language distinguishing between internal ADUs and attached ADUs, since they're treated the same in the code anyway. The next 2 amendments that I have for you this evening will just correct typographical errors in the parking lot landscaping standards. The code should read that 1 canopy tree per 12 parking spaces would equate to 12 canopy trees for 144 parking spaces. Current code says 44, but it should read 144, so this would just correct that. The next amendment, well, the other typographical error that I have is in section 18589. It inadvertently requires a modification to an approved plan when there is a reduction in the size of the public utilities. That's illogical. It should read that it's required whenever there's an increase to the size of the public utilities. And I took that one out of turn because the next one is relative to electric vehicle parking. This originally started as a cleanup item to align the metrics used to calculate required parking for electric vehicles, but the amendment sparked a lot of interest and has resulted in staff drafting more significant code changes that Linda is prepared to present to you this evening.
Good evening. As Catherine mentioned, this was part of the last package of amendments that you reviewed, and we were trying to do some cleanup on the language. And So this is the current language that's in the code, and if you recall, the language that is up there has been very confusing both for staff to understand, for applicants to understand, so we had proposed doing some simplification of that language to clarify that what we were really asking for is that for parking lots with 25 or more vehicles, 2% of the spaces would have full charging stations, which, because we do not define that term, it's been interpreted by staff to be a level 1 charging station, so 120 volt outlet. And then 2% to be electric vehicle ready, meaning that you have the raceway, the conduit that leads you, and the infrastructure's in place, so if you want to add a charging station in the future, you can. When we brought this to the City Council, there was a lot of discussion on this issue. There was not consensus, but we were asked to go back and look at it again. So that's why it's back before you this evening. And as noted in the case summary, there were some members of council that felt this is not something we should be requiring, that we should let the market handle this. Some that thought this was something we should be doing and were supportive of the proposed change that had been presented to them at that time, and then others who just had more questions in terms of what is the impact, what is the cost, are there incentives? And so after that meeting, staff went back and started doing additional research into this. So first thing to talk about, this requirement came into effect in December of 2021 with the new code. Since that time, we have approved 19 projects that have been subject to the EV parking requirements. And of those, there will be 94 full charging spaces, 109 EV ready spaces. And unfortunately, those are all of those projects are under construction, so I cannot give you pictures or show you what it looks like today. The graphic on your screen actually comes from a City of Raleigh publication, which we attached to the case summary, because they actually did a really great guide that talked about EV parking and what's involved in doing that, both for residential and commercial uses. So they have cost estimates. We have also reached out to developers, and we did give you a handout this evening because it's something we just received today from a developer, and there is a spreadsheet included with that email, and that's one of the, I believe he got that from a company that he has reached out to in terms of the cost of doing this. And so that spreadsheet breaks down what the estimated costs are, as well as the payback period, and it basically estimates that the break-even point would be 1.1 years in terms of making up your initial investment. And after that, it also projects revenues out over a 5-year time span. In addition to the cost of installing both the infrastructure needed to support EV parking as well as the units themselves, the Raleigh study pulled some information from the City of Denver, which is on your screen, which shows the savings if you invest in what they call future proofing, so that you are planning to have, you put that infrastructure in terms of making sure your electrical panels can support it, that you have raceway, conduit, and by doing that up front when you're developing a site, that can save you when you eventually go to install the infrastructure, as opposed to trying to retrofit and install that infrastructure at a later date. So this is what the City of Denver has estimated in terms of cost savings per space when you install that infrastructure up front as part of a project. The other research that we did involved benchmarking, and so the city has several cities that we use when we're tackling different issues to look at how they're approaching it. So in this particular case, we found 4 examples of peer cities that are addressing EV parking in some way in their regulations. One of them is offering a height and density bonus. So their height and density bonuses are linked to a point system. It gives you several different options in terms of how you accumulate points, and you get 1 point for meeting the requirements for EV parking and for doing that. And I believe you need 6 points as a minimum to get to the initial bonus. Some of the other incentives that we found were to exempt EV spaces from maximum parking requirements, so those would not be counted, and so you could go over your maximum by the number of EV spaces that you provide. And I will note that the incentives are tied to installation. So those incentives that we have found do not go towards just putting the conduit in or the infrastructure and being ready to support charging stations. You have to have a full charging station in order to get that incentive. The other incentive we found is providing additional credit towards minimum parking requirements. So for example, if you install EV charging equipment, for each space that you do that, it would count as 2 spaces towards your minimum, so that you actually you can provide less parking than the minimum required. For those that have mandatory requirements, we found a couple of distinguishing features. One is it's limited to specific uses and sizes of parking lots associated with those uses. So our current requirement applies to all uses that have parking lots with 25 or more spaces. The peer cities, we found that they tended to limit those uses typically to commercial, mixed-use development, multifamily residential, things of that nature. We also found that we started to see that they were differentiating, similar to what we have in our code, the EV capable, EV ready, and EV SE installed. And one of the things that we realized is we really haven't defined. We talk about EV ready, we talk about full charging stations. We don't define what that means in the code. And so this is an opportunity, if we need to adjust these regulations, to be very specific so that it's clearer for people that are designing projects what exactly is expected of them. So the proposed amendment, and I will say this is really a policy question, but based on the benchmarking that we did, we are proposing that we add definitions for EV capable, EV ready, and EV SE installed spaces, that we provide incentives, so exempting those spaces that have full charging stations from maximum parking requirements, and providing additional credit towards minimum requirements for EV spaces based on type. Limiting the uses to which mandatory EV parking requirements would be applied, so similar to what some of our peer communities have done. Our staff's recommendation is that it look at multi-unit dwellings as one of those is a use that where it would be required, and that's really to support the ability for residents who do not have a house where they can have the option of installing their own charging station to have something available for them. The other uses in the second bullet, hotels, large-scale retail, and commercial or standalone parking lots, those are recommended really to provide charging options for visitors, given that tourism is a huge part of our economy. The reason we selected those uses is those are typically where we would expect to find people parked for an extended period of time. And as you can see from the information in the case summary, depending on the level of charging, I think a level 1 is 3 to 5 miles per hour, whereas when you get to a level 2, it's more like, I want to say 12 to 40, and I don't have it in front of me. So you do have that data in your report. The other thing that we have added, because we understand and heard the concerns regarding the impact on affordability, particularly when it comes to residential units, is that if you have a residential development that's receiving governmental financing, that instead of having to provide a mix of the EV capable, so that's putting in your panel, your raceway, and an EV installed, which would be 2%, assuming you're going to have probably more than 50 spaces, 2% of each, that you could put in 4% of your spaces just being that EV capable, so that we're not requiring the installation of the equipment for 2% of the spaces. So that gives them the flexibility to reduce their costs for adding it in the future, but not requiring it immediately if there's no demand right now. So policy questions for consideration. Should EV parking be required? If yes, what type of charging should we be requiring? Is it level 1, level 2, or a mix of both? I will say that Charlotte in particular is very specific when they require it, and when they're giving incentives, it's for level 2 charging stations. And some of the research that we have found suggests that level 1 is really not useful or recommended for commercial applications. It's definitely doable, but it's not. You're not going to see a tremendous benefit from that. And this is the graphic that shows you charging time for a level 2 is 12 to 60 miles per hour. We are not even. You'll see we didn't even suggest a DC fast charge. I mean that's an incredibly expensive installation. So that's not something that we are recommending. In terms of future proofing, again, what should we be requiring? Are there different incentives we should be looking at? We tried to take the feedback and the discussion that the council had and come back with, some amendments to address some of the questions that we heard, as well as based on the research from our peer communities. Any questions? And I should note that spreadsheet that I provided you was for a level 2 charging station, so it gives the cost associated with a level 2 charging station.
All right, would you like us to, while you're up here, have our questions about EV, and then we'll go back to some of the other items? How about that?
Sure.
With the other amendments. Any questions for Ms. Painter about the EV parking requirements? Commissioner Collier?
Thank you. Can you tell me, go through the percentage of the spaces and the number per lot again? I've got too many 2%s, I think, that's got me confused.
And I'm gonna, if you'll allow me to grab my computer, because I did not bring a printout, so I'm gonna grab that real quick. So today, it's basically 2% under the current requirements, 2% what we call EV ready, so installing the conduit and just having the infrastructure ready for installation at a future date, and then 2% with full charging stations. And I believe that we actually tried to keep that the same, except we changed the terminology to EV capable.
So in that scenario, 2 spaces per 100 need to be capable of having it, and then 2 spaces. So out of it, 4 spaces need to be some version of EV.
Yes.
Okay. And level 2, I think, is that the one that we would, the thing that would charge for 12 to 60 miles for an hour? Yes,
and so what you'll see, again, in the staff report, understanding that there are differences on this, and currently it's interpreted from a staff position based on the current requirements that it's level 1, that you need to do, that's what we are looking for, or the minimum requirement. The proposed amendments in front of you give you 2 options on how we would define EV ready and EV installed, and those 2 different definitions, depending on which direction the commission and the council would like to go, would either go with a level 1 for EV ready or a level 2. And it really has to do with what you're installing at that rate, at that pace. So when we say EV, when you look at the table that is in your packet for number of spaces where it says doing EV capable, EV ready, or EV installed, that would really be based on how you define it. So we added the table, trying to be a little bit easy, make it easier for again for applicants. Between it's still 2%. We just did the math for folks, but between 25 and 74 spaces, you would have 1 EV capable space and 1 EV SE installed space, and the SE is supply equipment, so electric vehicle supply equipment installed, and that's the terminology that Charlotte uses. So the definition of capable is reservation of space in the electrical room for a panel to serve the future EV chargers and continuous raceway from the reserved panel space to the future EV parking space. So that is what an EV capable space would be. So 2%, once you get over 2% of spaces would need to have that infrastructure. In terms of the EV SE installed, that definition ties it to either a level 1 or a level 2 charging capacity, depending on what option you would like to put in there.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop everyone for just a second. Our power and video has gone out, and so we need to hang tight for maybe take a 5-minute recess while we make sure. It looks like we've had a power loss. Be about 10 minutes, so if we could take a 10-minute recess while the system reboots and we are back live streaming and recording.
Okay.
I apologize for the...
We will take a 10-minute recess. Okay, the Planning Commission meeting is called back to order, and we will pick up where we left off with electric vehicle parking. So It's a cliffhanger to those of you watching at home. We apologize.
So just for clarification, I believe where we left off was talking about the number and types of spaces that would be required under the proposed amendment. So in terms of the number, we are not proposing any changes from what's in the code today. It would still be 2% is being installed with charging equipment, and then 2% is being what we are now terming EV capable. So we are proposing to add definitions for those, but it's the same number. The one question would be, currently, because we don't define EV ready or full charging station, the interpretation from staff has been that a 120 volt outlet is sufficient to be considered your full charging station. And this is one of the questions we have is that something that we want to change to a level 2? Which would change the type of charging that is available. We are proposing that this be, as I mentioned earlier, be more limited in scope. Currently, it applies to all parking lots with 25 or more spaces. Under the proposal, we would be limiting that to certain specific uses. Multiple dwellings, hotel, motel, and large retail, which is basically 40,001 square feet or larger, and commercial parking, which are those standalone parking lots that are not associated with a particular use.
Okay, Commissioner Pollack?
Linda, I'm looking at the chart that we have up here. Charlie's got this seat. It's like a rocking chair. First question you sit there, policy question, should EV parking be required? So current code it is.
Yes.
You're not proposing any code changes at this point?
We're not proposing to eliminate it. We are proposing to refine it at this point.
Okay, so let's stick on the required for a minute, because it seems to me when you do the math, and I'll say this and then I listen, I want pushback from my peers, please, is we're talking about at 100, you're talking about 2 parking spaces, okay?
2 parking spaces with the equipment, the electrical supply equipment installed, and then an additional 2 parking spaces that have the infrastructure to add that equipment later.
I'm wondering if left to its own device, because I'm thinking about the 19 projects that you cited earlier, we probably have no data or feel whether they would have gone ahead and put those in anyway, given how they view the demand for the people that they're building the parking lot for.
I think some could. I'd have to check with staff and see if anyone, said, hey, I'm going to do this when we're doing plan review, we're going, what do we require and are you providing it? We're not asking for their motivation. I will say that, we talked about, was there any pushback from this regulation? Did we hear from folks who are saying, hey, why are you making me do this? And the 4 projects that we received as examples, 2 were related to housing, residential projects that are receiving governmental financing. So they do have income limitations and restrictions. One is a senior housing development with income limits, and the other one is, I believe, limited to residents at 60% of AMI. And so those projects did come in and say, hey, this is not our clientele, this is not who's going to be here. For the project with 60% AMI, the solution that we worked with them on, again, because we don't define the level of charging that you need, was that a level 1 120 volt outlet was sufficient, and so the suggestion was incorporate that into your light poles that you need to install into the parking lot, and that is your charging station for our purposes. Another one was a gas station that I believe had a significant number of parking, to be required, it would have to have at least 25 parking spaces, so new gas station and convenience store. And then the 4th project was a commercial or standalone parking lot. And the reason it is defined as that is because it is on a separate lot. However, it was being developed for an adjacent office development that was looking for more parking for their employees and is connected to that parking.
So let me refine my comments a little more. So again, I go back to requiring people to do something. And I wonder if these projects, for the most part, would, given that we talked about level 2 and the data you shared with us right before the meeting started, where it had a rate of return of a year, if we required something, and I'll ask this of my peers as well, would we, if we require it, which we do today, do we need to make the incentives better so that it becomes a no-brainer? Because we're having a lot of discussion about two spaces per 100, or 4 spaces per 100. That's really where we're going. So I'm struggling as to what we're trying to solve for. So with that, I'll stop, and I'll let my peers jump in, which I know they will. So.
Commissioner Adams?
So if you're curious about what the market actually drives and dictates, in the past 4 years, we've been involved with 3 different parking structures of close to 1,700 spaces, 2 of which were built prior to the requirement in 2021. And they were commercial office users. They voluntarily included spaces. I don't remember the exact percentage, but one of them built additional raceways in and has since tripled because their employees are following the trend of what they choose to drive, more electric vehicles. The third project is just gone through TRC review. That was a multifamily project. That developer was proposing a 10% basically, because again, they're seeing that their clientele, their renters, their employees they're demanding and needing this stuff. So I feel like the market is pushing people this way. I feel like what was already determined in 2021 as a benchmark actually falls below what I've personally seen in terms of realization in some projects recently. But again, I think that having something that is common sense and starts to, again, mirror what we are seeing with trends in the real world and planning for it as opposed to retroactively trying to figure out how to do it is the smart thing to do.
Commissioner Lennon?
How many commercial and multifamily projects have gone back and, forget this regulation for a second, but existing facilities have gone back in and installed these?
I don't think we have that information because that once those projects are built, if you're going back to retrofit, that's an electrical permit, I believe, through New Hanover County. So it's not something that would even necessarily come to the TRC to review.
But I think it'd be pretty easy to find out. And the reason I asked the question is to piggyback on what Commissioner Adams was saying, which is, I think, to me, I agree completely. Okay, first of all, I have to say this. It's crazy to me that we are going to require electrical parking spaces, but we can't require affordable units in an apartment complex. That makes no sense. I feel better. But I do think we have to be cognizant of the cost. But to that point, I think the market is absolutely dictating. I mean, nobody required them to be put in at Mayfair. I know I've seen them there. I know I've seen them at some of the hotels. They're putting them in response to market demands. And if the spreadsheet that we were given prior to this meeting that was provided by a local developer that talked to a third-party vendor that installs these and manages them, why wouldn't they do it? It's a 1.1 year payback based on this with $107,000 in revenue over 5 years. So there's your incentive for a builder. So I think, all that being said, I do think it would be interesting to look back. New Hanover County can pull the electrical permits for these to figure out how many have been put in. So I think to require anything more than where we were, I mean, just jumping ahead for me personally, I think this started out as minor language cleanup, and somewhere went horribly off the rails into all these other issues. I was pretty happy with what this body recommended at the last discussion, and that's where I'm going to end up. I mean, I do think the 2% is a fine number, but I think to go beyond that and to start dictating what kind of chargers and where, I think developers can do that on their own based on the market demand.
So you're, Commissioner Lennon, suggesting we not make any changes to the current?
I don't remember exactly what was in the.
I think my understanding is what Commissioner Lennon is recommending is the proposal that we brought before you in the last package of amendments that was sent to council and.
And somewhere it changed. Or
Well, the council did not, they approved the entire package with the exception of the language related to electric vehicles. And they had a lot of discussion, again, with some saying this shouldn't be a requirement, some saying, no, we think it should. And so they asked staff to go back and do more work and research on it and come back with something with the next package, which happened to be this one. So we put together something based on the benchmark research that we did after that council meeting. But what I'm hearing you say, Commissioner Lennon, is that your preference would not be the updated proposal from staff, but the original proposal that came before you, and I want to say probably January.
And just to be clear, that's just my personal opinion. Yes, yes, correct. Okay. Because you did clean up the items that originally caused you to propose the amendment in the first place. Okay.
Commissioner Woodruff?
I got lost in all that. And I don't even, but if we keep the first inquiry, should it be required? My personal opinion is no. But if we're going to keep what we've got, we still got to do the cleanup, right? I mean, with like your second inquiry, level 1, 2, 3, I mean, it seems to me level 2 is where you got to go. Level 1 is just a couple batteries hanging on a post.
Right.
You know, and whoever said hanging on a telephone pole was just, but anyway.
Light pole.
Light pole, telephone pole, whatever. So anyway, that's my point. Mine is, I don't believe in light of what I think the market will drive what it'll need to be. And it'll be so much more than what we're even requiring that we're getting into something that we don't need to be in. But if we're going to keep it, then I think there are some little things that we do need to touch base on that you've gone through, just so that for those things that are required, we know it's the right thing, not something that's ridiculous.
Commissioner Lennon?
The other part I forgot, thank you, I forgot to mention, and I did reread the question I asked you prior to the meeting. Again, my personal opinion, I don't see, and this is why I made the affordable housing comment, if there's government financing involved in a residential project to make it affordable or workforce-based, I don't know why we should have this requirement at all. If the developer of that particular project wants to do it, great, but that's the last type of development we want to add any additional cost to, in my personal opinion. I don't see the rationale behind that, and I appreciate that you're saying just get the infrastructure there to the 4% number versus the actual chargers, but there's still an expense. Mm-hmm. There's still limitations on planning and everything else.
Your recommendations included exempting them from additional requirements outside the government financing, right?
The recommendation was instead of doing 2% of capable, so having the infrastructure in place, and 2% with the charging equipment, that it just be 4% is capable, so that you've done the prep work so that at some point in time, understanding that those projects have a very long lifespan, and if that technology comes down in price and someone who lives there owns an electric vehicle, that it's easy to install that equipment and that charging equipment later on, and so that they're not put in a position where, you know, in 5 years, if this, you know, or 10 years, whatever that time frame is, that they're looking at the retrofit costs and the cost to actually put that supply, the infrastructure in to those spaces, in addition to purchasing the equipment if that demand changes.
I understand the theory and the examples, but we don't have any guarantee that they would ever put in the stations into the capable ones, right? I mean, that's based on their own, the discretion of the owner, if they are market-driven.
Correct. It's the putting in the EV capable, putting in that infrastructure is really just intended to say, look, plan ahead, and if you get to a point where you want to install that charging equipment, it's going to be easy for you to do so, and you don't have to go back at a larger expense to retrofit and try and add the raceways and the panel capacity for the electrical.
Commissioner Pollack?
So really what this comes down to that says you could take the corrections and the additions and the corrections to the package as you've displayed them here. You could effectively say, Mr. Developer, I'm not going to require you to put electric charging stations in, but if you do, this is the code definition. Can we do that, or am I splitting hairs?
The table would change, because essentially what you would be doing is you would then change it, because right now it's a combination of the infrastructure to support future installation and actually installing equipment. Okay. So if the commission's recommendation is no, you should not have to install it, and I actually think one of our benchmarks did that. They just said you have to install and have it ready for installation.
Yeah.
That is another option that you could look at and say that a certain percentage of parking spaces have to be installed, and then the question is, are we saying have it ready, you know, for example, instead of is it EV capable or EV ready, and is it to support level 2? Yeah. You know, what level does it have to be ready for?
I mean, all the technical corrections you've made, I think make sense. I'm just struggling with that we still make it mandatory again, because we're talking about 2 spaces or 4 spaces by your definition per 100. And I would agree with the comments that were made earlier. I mean, the market's going to dictate what a developer's going to do. You know, putting these in, and most developers, you know, Commissioner Adams, I'm thinking, are going to probably acquiesce to the thoughts that you shared anyway. I don't know that we need to keep telling them to do that. That's where I'm struggling.
I do like the uses you've picked out, the places that people are likely to park for quite a while. The hotels, and those make sense to me. Commissioner Adams.
As someone who has to interpret this code on a regular basis, I do think that there is benefit to the clarity of the table and the added specificity of the type of uses that we think are most appropriate. I do agree with Commissioner Lennon, though, about I have a little bit of anxiety about how specific we should be trying to define what design future-proof to, because there could be an AC level 3 in 3 years that we don't know about. I mean, this is a technology that changes so fast. I think having maybe a little less definition around types 1, 2, or 3, level 1, 2, or fast charge makes sense to me, and still allows for the need for future proofing.
Say that again.
Future proofing, yes.
Okay.
EV installed spaces, yes. More specificity on where and what project types. Less specificity about designating what type for the charging, level 1, 2.
So maybe have a minimum, as opposed to saying level 2, just have a minimum, or?
So I'm going to see if I can interpret this. So I think based on that, what you'd be saying is if you're looking at the minimum, then the definition of EV installed would be tied to that level 1 charging. And if you want to put in more, you can put in more. Okay.
And your level 1 being the plug on the light pole. I mean, I know that's very simplified. So I think I agree with all the comments, and I'm also of the opinion that we probably shouldn't just require them, but they already are. So I'm also looking at 4 spaces. If we want EV charging stations, to me, it seems that you're going to spend 75% of the cost to put in the raceway and all the equipment that you've got to have to pull wires later. Why not have 4 required if that's what you want? I mean, in the end, if we want charging stations, they need to be able to charge something rather than sit there and look pretty. And I don't know that that's a great solution, and I certainly don't know that that's what anyone here has said. But at the same time, we are talking about 4 spaces and large parking lots. We know they're being put in right now. We have the requirement in our code. So, you know, do we go forward and say you need to install them at this level 2, or just say they all need to be the level 1, but they've got to at least be wired up somehow? I mean, these empty spaces for the future and future proofing, that's great, but you're going to have to retrofit anyways.
I don't know if future proofing is even a thing with technology that changes this fast. My hybrid recharges when I hit the brake.
Well,
I don't have to plug it in.
Do what now?
Yeah. It gets better mileage in the city than
Better
in
get some new battery hanging things.
Just as real empirical data, essentially 50% of the cost is raceways and infrastructure, and 50% is the actual charging equipment. Because I'm looking at line item pricing right now from a job that's being bid. It's close.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and I think that was my point, and I'm glad you brought that up. You're spending a lot of money to put the middle ground in, the one that really does nothing. I would either say go back to what you were talking earlier, level 1, that's what's required. There are none of the in-betweens. You've got to require level 1 so you can plug in like you could plug in at your house at least. If you want to do more than that, maybe there is some incentive. But I think if we throw the incentive in all of this now, we're really going to send this into a big tailspin. I think it is just clarify what the level 1 thing is. Your language clarification is wonderful in terms of the chart. And I think the 4 uses you've got in of where it should be required, I agree with those. Those are the places that are most appropriate for them. So I think the middle ground is the part that I think I have issue with, because I think it's still going to cost folks money.
And I don't see the capable ones really having a lot of teeth to spend half of which you're halfway there to getting to another, or just have 3. If you're going to spend 50% putting in 2 capables, just put in 3% and actually have a 3rd charging station. I don't know that the capable ones, we don't have any regulation over when they actually get used, and if it's market driven, somebody's going to put it in without a regulation. So, you like that? I do. Okay. Mr. Lennon?
Well, I think I was going to respectfully disagree until you said the last part, which is, I mean, the market they are going to figure it out. And I think Commissioner Adams' point too is that, and I appreciate all the research and the pages and pages of stuff we were given, and I totally blacked out halfway through it because, I mean, this technology is going to be different in 2 years. It's going to be different in 3 years. So I think just having a base, all that said, for me personally, I understand the cost, and if you're going to put in 2, why not 4? Those are business decisions. Me personally, I'm sticking with what I said the first time with January. I don't want to see us increase this at all, because then to me that gets into question number 1, which is should it be required? And I heard a lot of people up here say no, and so I don't want to do anything that increases the burden that was already in the code that we passed in 21.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of no, but up here.
So,
Commissioner Pollack.
so Commissioner Lennon, what you're basically saying is fall back to the January language, for lack of I guess that was about the right time frame. But would you accept the the updated language that the team put in there, or would you want to go all the way back to that January language?
If Commissioner Adams could remember what he said again. I think, to answer your question in all seriousness, I think going back to what we recommended approval for in January, what was sent to council ultimately, which addressed the 2%, it addressed future growth of the parking lot, and it limited the types, right?
So that just cleaned up the language. So if I could, I'm going to try and.
Please.
What I'm hearing is from Commissioner Adams, the table makes it easier to understand. Limiting the uses to the 4 that are proposed makes sense, which was, right now it's all parking lots with 25 spaces, whereas this would only apply to those 4 uses that are identified in the revised proposal. And then combining that with Commissioner Lennon's comments of, if we were to keep essentially the same requirement, it would be, and that's, I think, what staff was trying to do in that table, which is 2% at the EV capable, which is literally, so in defining what that is, and then 2% at EV SE installed, but going with the definition for EV SE installed that ties it to a level 1 or 120 volt. Is so that it's status quo in terms of we're not requiring any additional number, but we are limiting it to specific uses. We're putting a table and definitions in so that is clear for people to understand what they are expected to do, that we don't need the EV SE ready. We could delete that definition. Does that make sense to folks?
One last thing that isn't quite clear from the markups. Where is the literal definition of what is EV capable as a definition? What is EV ready as a definition?
So that is, it's actually on page 17 of your case summary. So EV capable, the proposed definition is reservation of space in the electrical room for a panel to serve the future EV chargers and continuous raceway from the reserved panel space to the future EV parking space. And then based on the discussion of trying to keep the EV SE installed at a level 1, we had provided 2 alternative definitions, but the one that would go with what you're proposing is EV SE installed, EV charging stations capable of providing a minimum of 12 amp 1.4 kilowatt.
Where's the definition of EV ready?
EV ready is under B. It is, so EV ready, again, going with the level 1, it would be installation of electrical panel capacity and raceway with conduit to terminate in a junction box or 120 volt outlet accessible to parking space. And the question is, do we need EV ready or do we just want EV capable and EV installed, which is the status quo for under today?
I think that is much more clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So eliminate EV ready from definitions and from the table.
So we'll just have installed and capable.
Yes.
Is that right?
Using the definition that goes with level 1 charging capacity for installed.
And for the record, I withdraw my objection to should this be mandatory or not.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't feel like the level 1 does anything. Commissioner Lennon?
At the risk of, I feel like we've come to a really good place, but go back to the projects receiving government financing. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on that? I know we're just talking about basically installing raceway, right?
Raceway and reserving room for a panel in the electrical room.
For 4%. Does anybody else have any other thoughts of that, on that?
Well, actually, because if you look at some of the incentives, they can reduce the number of parking spaces required
right? So in my mind, if you provide, I think even capable, you can start to reduce some of your minimum parking. Now, it's not a lot, but do the cost of two raceway-capable infrastructures equal less or more than being able to reduce your parking by 3 spaces, right? So again, I think that the cost is minimal, and there are ways to offset the cost by, even providing less parking in situations like that.
And one thing, because we deleted EV, the proposal right now that I'm understanding is to eliminate the term EV ready. My question on that incentive was we had tiered the incentives, as Commissioner Adams referenced, where if you installed it, it was a credit. Each space would count as 2 spaces. If it was EV ready, it would count as 1.5, and if it was EV capable, it would be 1.25. Would you like to change that to EV capable as 1.5 spaces?
That makes sense. All right. Any other, do you have what you need on that?
I think so. Thank you.
What, if we could get, do you have the cost, what would the cost be? Do you have those costs in front of you for what we're requiring of the LIHTC projects and the other government financing projects? You with the, the total. Just
At least based on the documents that Linda provided earlier. Yeah, those right there.
Well, and you said it earlier too, like a surface parking space costs $8,000.
$8,000.
A parking garage space costs $22,000. An underground parking space costs $50,000. I'm not good at math, but I can do that math, okay.
Yep.
Commissioner Woodruff?
I'm still back to the first point about should there be regulation. I still say no. The whole discussion seems to me is we're dealing with the market. What's the market going to do? I mean, incentives is one thing we could do, but I think the market's going to take care of everything that we're trying to do. And I'm not sure what we're trying to do, whether 2 spaces, 4 spaces. These developers now, my guess is the statistics we have now are from yesterday, which are probably old already. So it's going to change so fast. And this idea that we're going to make it a minimum level of putting in a 1, which go back to the pole with the plug on the side of it, is just a joke.
It's a joke.
And so to me, at the very least, if we're going to stick with what we got, level 2 needs to be the only thing that's even practical to even talk about. But I think any developer, if not now, is going to. Why would they want to put a ready one in there? Just go ahead and put all 4 of them in there because they know they're going to be putting more in as time goes down. So I'm still back to I think this is market driven. I think we're in an area that we don't need to be in. But if we're going to keep what we got, at least make it to where what we're requiring is a level that's workable and appropriate to have for the person who's using it.
Yeah. So is there because we're not going to vote until all of them, or we talk about all of them, right?
You have to talk about all of
'Cause
them, and you still have a public hearing.
Right. Right. So let's at least come to a little more of a consensus on the level 2 being the minimum of for standards for these guys. Go ahead.
I'm fine for level 2.
If we're going to do it, let's keep Commissioner Lennon.
I would be adamantly opposed to that. And that's just me. I think we need to call a spade here, and what we're talking about is something that is cool and vogue and in the social discussion nowadays. And I respect that. What we're also doing is forcing EV parking and EV cars to be in the conversation for new development. And I really think that's all we need to do. Because if we start forcing percentages, you know, another planning commission in this county had been talking about 30%. And that's a complete game changer. So I think Commissioner Adams really sized this up correctly in saying the technology, the market factors, all of those things are really, that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. Our requirement, yes, it's basic, but it forces it into the discussion. And it also provides the opportunity for the market to, okay, well, we have to talk about it, let's talk about it. Oh, look at this spreadsheet where we can make $100,000 per space over 5 years. Maybe we want to put 6 of them instead of 2 of them. Then I think we've done our job. I think to go beyond that, I think we're dictating something. What's next? Are we going to put 5-gallon gas cans in every space? I mean, seriously, it's to a point where I think I don't know how the citizens of Wilmington come out ahead by us making this any more stringent. That's kind of where I end up.
Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, that takes me then back to kind of where Commissioner Woodruff is you know, are we trying to pick winners and losers in the market where we're not, I don't think we're smart enough to do that. And so now it takes me back to you don't require it, but if you choose to do it, these are the recommended standards. Because I mean, we've all said the same thing. The one common thing we've all said is the market's going to take care of this, one way or another, okay? And that's what I'm struggling with. We're dabbling into what we think people are going to do versus letting builders go figure that out. Are we putting? Does what's on the books today or any of the proposed language that Linda and the team have come up with? Does that put an added burden on a developer today than might already be there? One of the discussion points at City Council, and you'll remember this, was the amount of statutory kinds of costs that are already on builders. And the number that was thrown out was like 40% of their cost were statutory. You had one end of the spectrum said, that just feels like a lot. Yeah, you actually had another end of the spectrum that said, you know, we probably maybe need to have more, which, you know, more government involvement in the cost of construction. So I feel like we're trying to solve 2 ends of a spectrum here, and the right thing is to come together somehow, but I'm torn again.
We've all said, should we require it? No, but. Well, most of us, I won't speak for everybody, but that's many of the comments. We could just send a recommendation for incentives and not requirement.
Then you've kind of led the developer to where you want them to get to, which is a way to accomplish it.
Yeah, Commissioner Adams, I was waiting for you to jump in there. Go ahead.
But again, I don't think what we're being charged to look at in terms of revisions is a numerical difference of anything more that isn't already in place and hasn't been since 2021. Is that in terms of numbers of required spaces?
Correct.
It's about do we want to add more clarity and specificity around the type of spaces that are already required as the 2021 land code?
Then here's the proposal I'd make, is you basically take 2 pieces of paper back to the council, right? One says, we don't require it, but here are more incentives if you want to go do this. Another one says, yes, you require it, and here's the specificity, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I don't see any other way around this. You really have 2 choices to make. If you don't require it, then you're down one path. If you do require it, you're down another path. It's just really, to me, it's that simple at this point in time. I'm sorry?
But it's already required.
Understand that, but I believe the charge that was given was to go back and clean up the language, okay, to address these things that we're all talking about. One of those, I interpret it to be, should it be required? I mean, I think we have to recognize that that is an option.
It was on our screen. The question was on our screen.
It was on your screen because there was not consensus from the council on this. There were council members who felt it should not be a requirement. There were council members who thought it should be. There were those who had questions and said, are there incentives? And so that was what, staff went back to, and that was what we went back to look for and say, how are other people doing this? What incentives, could we offer on this?
I have more confidence in incentives helping the conversation at city council level than some of the other conversation we've had trying to dictate design and specs.
Can you say that again?
I might rephrase it while I'm at it, dial it down. I think we should focus on incentives over requirements. I feel like that would be more helpful to the city councils, the place where they are and the questions that they have.
And I think you're right. I think the incentives that we have on page 18 for reduction of parking spaces, if you add an addition to, I think those are great. We still have the requirement of the numbers, 4% in total, 2% on one side, 2% on the other. The only thing that I think we just don't go in the middle. Either we leave it just like it is with the 2% that are fully charging, as it says, which means a plug in the pole or a plug like you would put outdoors for your housing Christmas lights, something like that. The right way, though, not like the way most of us do it. And then there are 2 spaces out of 100 that need to be able to, at some point in the future, be extended. They can get reductions. I like the 4 items of the types of uses of where they're going to be. I don't think any of us argue that those are where they're going to go regardless of the market. The only thing that's left out is a single-family neighborhood, and they're just not going to go in there unless they're plugging in at their house. I think if we're going to keep the requirement of having something in the code, 4%, 2%, the numbers are the numbers, they at least need to be able to do something. I don't think keeping a halfway step in there makes any sense whatsoever. And if that means we put 4 electrical plugs out behind the station for as a start, let's start there. That to me is not it is onerous because it is more money on the developer. But if you do it and you're able to gain some of the deductions, the dollars and cents start to clean themselves up as it goes forward. And as Commissioner Lennon said in that chart, if everyone understands the payback of your investment, these things are not they're going to be used. There are a lot of electric cars. I watch them at the parking deck every day. Folks are always in their parked and charging their cars. The next discussion we're going to have is whether you have to back into the space or pull into the space, and I don't really want to go there at all. But I think 4 spaces, if that's what it is, out of 100 that are a level 1, put the plug out there, the simple plug out there, the 120, I think that cleaned the language up. Everybody can understand that. They're not going to understand the different types of, I'm sure there's 100 different manufacturers of the actual plug-in to the cars. So I think, if there's a requirement there, let's at least start somewhere, but we're not adding right now anything on top of what the code already says, except you put in 4 plugs instead of 2.
Okay, and clearing up the uses.
And clearing up the uses, correct.
All right, have we beaten this one?
I think we've beaten it to death, but.
How about this, while we're looking at the other amendments, would you put like a little summary or table or something together for us to look at for when we vote.
I'll try.
Sorry to have you multitask while we're here.
That's okay.
That would be,
Just whip that up.
I'll give it a shot. I will say that I've heard a few different perspectives as we've gone on, so.
right, so that's why we need to
Okay.
make sure we know what we're voting on. Thank you so much. All right, where are we headed now to, Ms. Thurston, would you come back up for us?
Thank you, Linda, for taking that one.
All right, let's go to ADUs next, since we have an audience here for that. Commissioners, what are your comments, questions on the ADUs? Well, sorry, we have to wait till the public hearing. We have to wait through all the conversation for that.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to echo what I think we all talked about at the workshop that we went to. I applaud the changes here to make it easier, frankly, to do an ADU, which I think was the intent, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for doing that.
Agreed. And it cleans up some common sense. And I really like the ability to go two-story to stack it to reduce the footprint of some of these ADUs, since we want more of them. Any other? Great. Commissioner Lennon?
I'm sorry, did anybody else have anything on ADUs? I just had two other quick questions. On the offices in the historic district, are there existing offices in the HD now?
There are. We used to allow offices in some of our historic districts by special use permit. I don't have a list of the different offices in the HDR, but I could certainly provide that to you.
I guess my question is, what happens if they move out?
I mean, another office, a different office could move in. If there's an office in the HDR, it would be a legal non-conforming use, and it would be able to continue to operate, and it could even, change to a different office. If it were to revert to residential, though, it wouldn't then be able to
Then that would be it.
become an office.
Is there a continuity clause to that, meaning if it's vacant for a period of time?
It's 180 days. If they vacate the office and, the realtor or the property owner or someone sends us a letter that says it's our intent to market this as an office, we want to preserve the non-conforming status of it, we'll take that, and if it takes 2 years to sell the property, then we would still honor the non-conformity as long as they're marketing it as an office.
Okay. So this doesn't harm any existing use in your mind?
No.
Okay. And then my other quick question on the legacy districts. I'm just not smart enough to figure out what this, so what is the impact of this?
This will allow the legacy districts, like the mixed-use district outside of the 1945 corporate limits and the MX district, to develop under essentially the same exceptional design standards that we have in the new code, where we don't limit the residential density. We're only looking at the impervious surface area for the exceptional design criteria, because we found that that's what actually impacts the water quality more so than the number of units per acre.
So do you have any examples of like before and after impacts of this?
I do not. I'm not aware of any projects that have developed under the exceptional design criteria since the new code. Are you?
Is anybody else on the commission aware of any of those?
Are you speaking of the 2.5 dwelling units per acre? Is that the density you're talking about?
Yeah, there's
Limiting it?
currently a limitation of 2.5 units per acre
Right.
within the watershed resource protection areas. This would look only at the impervious surface area rather than the density. Any other applicable density, requirements would still need to be met, but this wouldn't limit those projects 2.5 units per acre when they're using exceptional design.
Yeah, so if before we had a 25% limitation on, or maximum on impervious and a 2.5 cap on dwelling units. So if you take the cap of the dwelling units out, you can still build your, and it was done anyways, you just had to buy your points down. So in the end, it's what she's cleaning up now makes more sense overall. It's not necessarily less restrictive, but it's a whole lot easier to process that data in a development.
Thank you.
All right, any other amendments that we have questions for staff? All right, we'll move to the public hearing for all of the amendments in agenda item number 3. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of agenda item number 3? Just come up to the podium and start with your name and your address.
My name is Roger Gins. I live at 1917 Wolcott Avenue. And I'm here with Backyard Housing Group. And we just really wanted to express our appreciation for the work that the Planning Department staff has done. These revisions for the accessory dwelling units will create more opportunities for constructing additional units. It also demonstrates the staff's recognition of the significance of this housing option, which can contribute to both affordable and senior housing, and it is a great asset to this community. And I want to thank you again. That's about it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gins. Anyone else here to speak in favor of agenda item 3? All right. Anyone here to speak in opposition to agenda item 3? All the amendments. Anyone here to speak on agenda item number 3? Just trying to buy Linda a few more minutes. All right, the public hearing is closed.
Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Yes, Commissioner Collier.
I would like to thank the gentleman, I think it's Mr. Gins, that just spoke. You waited a long time to thank the staff, and that is very, very appreciated. I concur with you. They do a wonderful job, and I appreciate you standing up there and saying that. Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? Okay, when Ms. Painter is ready, we'll get a little summary of what we're doing with the EV.
Chairman Lyle?
Yes, Commissioner Adams.
If I could maybe take a stab at what
Sure.
I think in parallel with what you're doing. I'm going to kind of go through these and stop me. I guess let me go through them all, and then if there's different opinion or lack of clarity about it, we can talk about them. But what I kind of understood was leave the current required percentages unchanged from 2021. I think that's what I heard Commissioner Lennon say as well, because that would really be the result of us doing nothing, right? Eliminate the EV-ready definition and the minimum charging design standards associated with that, but still incorporating a table with only 2 definitions. 1 being EV capable and 2 being EV SE with only a level 1 minimum design requirement. And we let the market determine whatever they think is applicable beyond that. Talked about adding a table for the required spaces based on quantities. That's super clear. Clarifying the project type uses. I believe there were 4 that I think we all thought were appropriate. And including the parking requirement incentives to reduce the minimum required parking where provided EV-capable and EVSE spaces.
All right, does that reflect everybody's understanding of what we're, Commissioner Woodruff?
Understanding, yes, vote no. But, I mean, and that's fine. I understand what's being said. I just still do not feel we need to have any compulsory requirement on a developer to do this. I think they're going to take care of it from the get-go. But if it's the will of the commission that, you know, we'll leave the mandatory part in there, it's fine with me. I just think it'll be moot before it gets old. It's so low, what we're requiring them to do, because even when you were talking about the market will take it over. You know, if they, instead of just using the light pole over here and plug it in, if that's too low, the market will take care of it. I think the market will take care of all we're talking about. I think all we need is the incentives that we've got, and maybe beef those up even more to promote it, give that developer something to think about. But I just don't think we need to have the mandatory aspect of it.
Commissioner Lennon?
The only thing I would throw out there for your consideration is, and I don't disagree, and several of us up here have said I'd rather not see it. The reality is, to that first question that popped up, we don't make policy up here. We just recommend. And if we recommend nothing, then we've had no voice in the outcome, is the way I look at it. And I think anybody who watches this interaction that we've had up here tonight, we've put a lot of thought into this. I think we've come up with some imperfect solutions. And so that's why I am concerned about perfect world. It's not in there. It's not there. But it's not a perfect world, and we don't make policy. Another body does, and to not at least have an opportunity to, like I said, have a voice in that policy-making decision, I wouldn't be able to live with that. So just think about it.
I don't think anything that we do which is the way I think this is going, is going to be harmful. I think it's fine. I just don't think it's necessary. I just think the market will take care of all of it. We don't need to be in that business. But what we're trying to do here tonight to keep it where it is without making, I got no problem with that. I just think there's a bigger question, which was the number one thing on the sheet. Maybe that threw us off or threw me off when it said, should we have mandatory? You know, I'm just saying I don't think we should. But I have no problem voting in favor of where it's going. It's just I don't think it's necessary.
Anyone else? All right, does that reflect your understanding of what Commissioner Adams summarized? Does that reflect it? Okay.
I had was, did you include the exemption for governmental financing for residential, or was that?
Is it in the what's in there in front of us, but not in the current code, is just having them do the RET EV capable? Is that right?
I'm sorry, Pat, I saved a revised version. Can you get that up on screen?
I think, since I was the one that asked the question, the answer I got was that there's a lot more incentive to provide that 4% and take advantage of the reduction in parking. Right. So, yes, it's a requirement on them on that type of project, but there's economic benefits that would outweigh that initial cost. Is that accurate? Okay. So therefore, I was not proposing to remove that.
Okay. So this is what I had on screen based on the discussion. Thank you, Commissioner So definitions, deleting the proposed definition of EV ready. EV SE installed, use the definition for level 1 charging. Incentives, change the minimum parking credit for EV capable from 1.25 to 1.5 spaces. Delete the credit for EV ready. What was in red was, what was in black was what I thought there was kind of consensus on, and then what was in red was the question, because that's where it got into the requirements. Based on what Commissioner Adams said, applicability, retain that the limits, limiting this to the 4 uses that are proposed, keeping that, deleting that second bullet based on the discussion you just had, which, so we would take out that exemption and we would amend the table to delete the EV ready spaces. Okay. So with the exception of the second bullet under applicability, that is the recommendation, or potentially the recommendation of the commission.
Okay. Okay, I think it sounds like we could all live with that. It was well said. We've come up with some, it's one item. Yeah, we voted on all of it together. So if there's any other, thank you, Ms. Painter. Is there any other discussion on agenda item 3? There's someone ready to bring us home here, make a motion. Commissioner Pollock?
Yeah, I'll make a motion if there's no other discussion. Okay. I'm going to make a motion that we adopt and approve agenda item number 3, and that is the various amendments and cleanup items to the Land Development Code to include the clarifications that that Linda just put in front of us based on our discussion. Okay, I believe that this request, the commission believes this request is reasonable and consistent with the Create Wilmington plan. Proposed amendments will correct minor errors and correct issues discovered during implementation of the Land Development Code and help reinforce the overall goals of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Commissioner Pollock has moved to approve agenda item 3. Is there a second?
Second.
The second is from Commissioner Adams. Is there further discussion? All right, all in favor say aye. 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 Anyone opposed? Motion passes 6-0. All right, any other items from the commission this evening?
Yes, I do, and it's an item that I'm actually looking for guidance from my peer commissioners and from the city staff, and it's in the area of this ongoing discussion about workforce housing, housing affordability, affordable housing, that this journey that we've all kind of started going down, to include our planning session that the city staff put together for us the other day. And I attended another meeting today. It was the Workforce Advisory Committee, and I admit to leaving that meeting, a lot of good people there, a lot of well-intentioned, but I admit leaving more confused about what we're trying to solve for, all right? Yesterday, as Chairman Lyle, as you remember, and Ms. Painter, we had a good discussion on our agenda review about data and about, when you look at the study that people will quote from, it says, here's what the deficit is.
The Bowen report?
Yeah, thank you. And when you look at the chart, the one chart that Linda brought up that actually shows where here were the deficits by unit type. Here's where it looks like we were actually better than the deficit or still a major deficit. And the point I'm on is, I know I asked Brian to look up from a city standpoint, and part of the problem is it's hard to pull out city numbers from county numbers right now in that report. But I asked Brian to look at the number of, I'll use Commissioner Kofer's definition of new doors approved by the Planning Commission just since the beginning of January 2022. And that number was approximately, off the top of my head, was about 4,700. And he broke it down by number of units, and we sent it all out to you guys. And where I'm going with this is I was trying to understand if the denominator is, I thought, at a county level is like 29,000. I've been told at a city level, it's like 12,000, that projected deficit. How does that 4,700 unit, it's 4,700 door projects addition play into that data? And I realize as I've gone to a couple other meetings that is a far more complicated question than I ever realized it, and maybe it's more complicated than it should be, but nonetheless, current course and speed it is. I'm looking for some guidance. I've gone to some of these meetings, and it's clear to me that there are advisory commissions here, advisory committees here, there's advisory committees here, advisory committee, they all feel like they are owing council advice directly to the city council or the county commission. When I've asked the question, how do you involve the planning commissions or the planning board, as the case may be, the answer, I get the 12 heads look. It's a deer in the headlights. And I'm just looking for some guidance so that I can, in my mind, draw a picture that says, what are all these groups? What is their purpose? So I can understand, who votes on what. Because I'm coming from an old project executive from way back when that says if I'm running a big project like this, which is trying to solve, whether you call it affordable housing, housing affordability, workforce housing, or as some tend to use those interchangeably, I'm trying to figure out how you would take all these different groups and are we moving in the right direction or in a concurrent direction. So that's what I'm struggling with. So I'm just looking for those of you on the commission that have, been around this a lot longer than I have, point me in the right direction so I can go off and bother somebody. So that's my ask.
Okay. That's a little outside of our scope as the planning commission, but I appreciate so much how you and the rest of the members of the commission are focused on affordable housing, and I'll certainly send out more educational material so that we can be ready for those projects when they do come before us. I think that is our role, like you're already doing, getting comfortable, getting more familiar with the landscape and what is happening outside of our meetings so that we can bring that into the meetings. So, Commissioner Lennon?
I'll go back to what we talked about earlier about the effectiveness of incentives, and I would encourage you to, or either you or us, have as many conversations as we can to the policymakers about the importance of incentives to those people that are spending the money and providing doors, right? Because ultimately, we can have wish list after wish list after wish list, but if we're not sitting at the table with the people doing the work and executing the projects, then it doesn't matter what our wish list is.
Commissioner Lennon?
If I could add to that, I agree not only on the incentives, but also the regulations and conditions often required. So you've heard me talk about the whole TIA process, and that's my little personal mission. Well, that's because it takes so long, and it's just time is money, and that just adds. The other request I would have is that I think the reality is every new door makes housing more affordable in New Hanover County. It doesn't matter if it's a government finance project or a market middle housing townhome project. It doesn't matter. Every door positively impacts the housing situation that our county's in. So that's why I think we need to look at a lot of the projects that we do the same way we would a Starway or anything else, because It's not just an affordable or workforce component, it's all of it.
You're right. Number one, it's a supply issue. So certainly building more won't solve all the problems. I don't know if there is a solution. If there was, somebody somewhere would be doing it. We do it too. But one of the ways we measure it is our rent prices. And, you know, we've seen a lot of, as you got the numbers, we've seen a lot of multifamily come through here in the past few years. And before that, rents were just continuing to rise and then sometimes skyrocket. The data, the most recent data we got was that the rents are going down a little bit since September, of last year. The occupancy rate is still really high though, so that's one of the ways we measure. Like you said, it's a really complex issue and a moving target when you're trying to measure it, and a lot of data. But we can certainly continue to supply the commission members with that information so that we're ready when those projects come up and we have the right questions to ask. Commissioner Lennon?
Just last thing I'll say, the last 2 years at the Affordable Coalition Breakfast, they've said the same thing, build more. That's how you solve the problem. The other thing is the associate professor from UNCW has said on multiple occasions, we're dying faster than we're being born. So if it were not for the in-migration, we would be shrinking in New Hanover County. So, you know, to everyone who thinks that now because they're here, we can stop growing, that's not how it works. I mean, in order to keep our economy vibrant, in order for our kids to have a place to live and jobs to get, we're going to keep growing. So I think spreading that message as much as you can is also something that helps a lot with the policymakers, as Commissioner Adams said, and others.
All right, items from the staff? Did anybody else have items from the commission? Good. Items from the staff?
So the City Council last evening approved 2 of the cases that you had seen the previous month. One was the conditional district rezoning for Kerr Avenue, which, as you recall, was an expansion of a project that you had approved in 2022 that had not yet started. The other one was Floral Parkway, and that was the commercial district mixed-use building that was located behind the hair salon in the existing parking lot. So those 2 were unanimously approved last night.
Thank you. Anything else on our... All right. If not, I'd love to hear a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Pollack, with the anybody second that?
Second.
Commissioner Adams, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We're out. Thank you.